Thank you all for joining us here at Heritage this afternoon in our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on our heritage.org website on all of these occasions, and would ask everyone here in-house if you'll be so kind to turn off cell phones as we begin, especially for those recording our events today. We will post the program within 24 hours on our website for everyone's future reference as well. Our guest today is Peter Schweizer. He's a research fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. From 2008 to 2009, he served as a consultant to the White House Office of Presidential Speechwriting. He is also a former consultant to NBC News. Have you lived that down? Among his previous books are The Bushes, Portraits of a Dynasty, Reagan's War, the epic story of his 40-year struggle and final triumph over communism, and Do As I Say, Not As I Do, Profiles in Liberal Hypocrisy. That book, by the way, was on the New York Times bestsellers list for 8 weeks. In fact, and I love this quote, The Economist magazine pronounced Do As I Say the 9th biggest selling political book on the entire planet in November 2005. Additionally, he was executive producer of In the Face of Evil, an epic documentary based on his book Reagan's War, which won the 2004 Liberty Film Festival. And if you will ask the writer, Steve Bannon, who is here with us today, it's the greatest film ever written. Today, we focus on his newest book here, Throw Them All Out, in which he examines the way the system works on Capitol Hill, or perhaps more aptly, the way Capitol Hill works the system. Please join me in welcoming my friend, Peter. Peter?
Thank you, old friend, for that introduction. It's great to be back at the Heritage Foundation and talking about this book. And it's nice to be back in Washington, D.C. I live in Florida, and I don't know how many people here that live in D.C. realize it, but you are now the wealthiest community in the United States. You passed Silicon Valley in terms of net income. So Washington, D.C. has the highest net income. And 7 of the 10 wealthiest counties in the United States are counties that border Washington, D.C. And I think that those two statistics are indicative of the problem that we face today and the subject that I'm here to talk about today, which is, I think, crony capitalism. Now, what do I mean by crony capitalism, and how is it different from free market capitalism? Let me sort of describe it by just giving a couple of archetype examples. Free market capitalism, I would give as an example of that, would be Steve Jobs, the late founder of Apple Computer. He joined what the Occupy Wall Street crowd would call the 1% by doing what? By creating products and services that people wanted to buy. People desired to buy Apple products. He became very wealthy. That is an example, in my mind, of free market capitalism. Steve Jobs did not have really hardly any lobbyists. He was not active politically. It was a voluntary purchase that people made of his goods and products that made him a very wealthy man. The crony capitalist, on the other hand, is less interested in that voluntary exchange, and they're interested in making money out of the political system. What matters to them is not creating innovative products or services, but having political connections, which allows them to get government contracts, which allows them to get set-asides in the tax codes, guaranteed government loans, guaranteed government grants, and access to inside information that's going to help them on investment decisions. So these, I think, are the two sort of archetypes that exist in America today. And my fear and concern is that we are increasingly moving in the direction of the crony capitalists and away from the free market capitalist, as Steve Jobs being an example. Let me talk about this phenomenon, crony capitalism, in sort of a couple of different areas. First, the people on the inside of the system, which are the politicians, and how they extract their wealth through this crony capitalism. Then I want to talk about the people on the outside that are politically connected and how they are able to effectively milk the system and use their crony connections to enrich themselves at our expense. And then finally, I want to talk about what are some possible solutions and does this really matter? I mean, we've always had, politicians that have, taken money under the table and have gotten rich. And we've always had, the railroad barons of the 19th century who cut sweetheart deals with the government. Should we even really care about this? And I think you can probably guess, given the fact that I wrote a book about it, that my answer is absolutely yes. I think this is the profound issue that we face in America in the 21st century. So let's talk about politicians first. America is supposed to be governed by self-governance, the notion that we send individuals to Washington who are supposed to represent ourselves, and it is supposed to be in some form a citizen legislature. Well, about 60, 70 years ago, that started changed, and we have a situation now where elected officials can not only come and perform public service, but they come and perform public service relatively middle class, and they leave very, very wealthy. Let me give you two recent examples from people, one from each party, because this is a bipartisan issue. I believe that this is a problem of human nature, not of one political party or the other. The first one would be Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House from San Francisco. When she first came into Congress in 1987, her net worth was around $3 million. In the 20 years she had served in Congress after that, her net worth has gone up 876%. Which means if you do it on a compounded basis, you're averaging about 24% return on your investment every year. I think George Soros or Warren Buffett or certainly me would kill for that kind of return on investment. So a dramatic increase in wealth. And I'm going to argue that at least part of that, a large part of that, is connected to her political position. What about a Republican? Well, the Speaker of the House immediately before her was Dennis Hastert from Illinois. Dennis Hastert, when he became Speaker in the late 1990s, had a net worth around $300,000. When he left as Speaker less than a decade later, it was in the millions. It could potentially have been as high as $11 million. He didn't inherit money. He didn't win the lotto. It's a function of him leveraging his position in order to enrich himself. Those are two individuals, but there are multiple others that I talk about in the book. I name people from both political parties, and this information comes from their public financial disclosures and comparing their activities with what they're working on in terms of legislation, what access they might have to sensitive information. So how does this work? How is it that elected officials are able to leverage their position and make money? Well, the first example I would give is the IPO, which I would consider simply a form of legalized bribery. And let me just give you an example of this. Let's say John is in the United States Senate, and I come into his office, and I need a favor. And I say, John, I need a favor. Here's a shoebox with $10,000 cash. I appreciate your help. What's going to happen? Well, if we get caught, we're going to go to jail. That's bribery. I'm giving him cash in exchange for a good. That doesn't happen so much in Washington anymore. You hear about the occasional gentleman like Congressman Jefferson who put $90,000 in his freezer. But that's the exception to the rule. And frankly, that form of illegal graft is really small potatoes. You can make a lot more money if you play it right, engaging what I consider legal graft. So now let's assume I go into Senator John's office, but instead of bringing a shoebox of cash, I say, John, I need a favor. I'm concerned about a piece of legislation. And you know, by the way, I'm involved with this company, and I'm going to give you access to initial public offering shares of stock. And you're going to be able to buy these at $20 a share. And then the next day when they go public, they're going to sell for at least $50 a share. And you can turn around and sell them the next day, and you can make $100,000. That's perfectly legal. And that scenario goes on quite frequently in Washington, D.C. And here's the challenging part. When congressmen and senators engage in initial public offering purchases of stock, they don't have to disclose it as such. They simply list it as another stock transaction. So when you're going through financial disclosure forms, the only way you can find out whether they received these secret IPO shares is by literally looking at the date of their purchase and seeing if that was before it was publicly available for the rest of us. This is what happened in the case of the Nancy Pelosi IPO that I talk about in my book and that you may recall was the subject of a 60 Minutes episode a couple of weeks ago. Literally, the Pelosi's, Nancy Pelosi and her husband, were given access to 5,000 shares of stock in Visa, the credit card company. They were able to buy those at $44 a share. The next day, when they went public, they immediately sold at $66 a share. And then within a matter of weeks, it was over $90 a share. So literally in a matter of day, there was a net gain of $100,000 in their Visa IPO stock. Now, Was there a quid pro quo? I don't know. What's curious, though, is that Pelosi received those access to those shares, which are enormously difficult for anybody to get. At the same time they received